Hey, what's going on, everyone? Okay, I'm gonna try to do the earphones this way today. Or, you know what? Yeah, I'll just do it this way. Okay, cool. All right, so we'll wait a little bit for some people to jump in. Let me share this in my other group. Let's see. Perfect. Posting. Okay, cool. All right. What's going on, guys? So, again, just my tradition, always sipping on a little bit of coffee during these lives, always from glass. You guys, I'm not getting any product endorsements or anything, but this is kind of what I've been just mixing with my coffee. So it's from LA Republica Superfoods. It's like an organic brand. And I just kind of like promoting organic brands. As you guys know, I'm not like big into supplements in general. And again, just really heavily emphasize just changing your lifestyle and diet. And 99.999% of the time, that's way more than enough. But it's pretty cool to see these. I usually try to buy my supplements from natural grocers. They have like a really good screening process for their supplements. And I kind of found this one, so I'd like, hey, want to try it out. It has like a couple different mushrooms, lion's mane, reishi, etc., turkey tail. And I just kind of put basically like a tablespoon or two in my coffee here. It kind of gives it a little bit of a different flavor, but I think it gives you like a little bit more energy. So cool. Just excited to share this one. Again, not getting any kickbacks, just happy to share kind of what I've been kind of tinkering with here and there. So you guys, if you guys have any questions at all, just let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. I do these lives for you. The topic today will be covering story gaps in a person's life and how they contribute to maladaptive behavior that leads to very common fat gain. Obviously, we'll be talking about fat gain here because it's such a common topic. I mean, 8.5 out of 10, 85% of Americans are either overweight or obese now. But just know like these story gaps that lead to various maladaptive behaviors lead to various symptoms at the biological level and sometimes even at the thinking and emotional dimension as well. And definitely not limited to, but some things that it contributes to are like high blood pressure, high resting blood glucose, low HDL, low testosterone, et cetera, high triglycerides even, any type of like poor lifestyle and nutritional choices that kind of lead to these various issues, also various skin issues or gut issues, et cetera, and not necessarily the story gap itself, but the maladaptive behavior that's a symptom of the story gap that leads to a lot of these pathologies, which are so normal and people still kind of like foolishly believe it's their genetics, et cetera. I can't tell you how many times I've run into someone saying familial hypertension runs in my family. I'm like, dude, that's because like no one at all is healthy in your family whatsoever. And they simply pass down those belief systems to you. And then obviously you continue to copy and paste that model and also run into the same problems. And a lot of times it's unknowingly. It's not like they're bad people. It's just they kind of just don't know any better. And they kind of pass down these beliefs that then lead to various unsustainable or poor lifestyle and nutritional choices that lead to high blood pressure, low testosterone, excessively elevated estrogen in males, triglycerides, type 2 diabetes, depression, anxiety, whatever, you name it, psychologically induced chronic insomnia, all that stuff. So we'll begin. And again, I'm just going to go down the list. These aren't in any hierarchy of importance, okay? Some of the aspects will be more important during certain portions of your journey than others. And it's critically important to understand two things. One is whenever listening to people online, just know they never met you. I never met you. This includes even like people you respect. They never met you. So because they don't know your core values, your specific situation, your specific background, et cetera, how are they supposed to tell you like what to do, you know? And there are no absolutes. in any topic, finance, or especially mental or physical health. Nature is a novelty generator. There's no two, it depends on if we're talking about non-duality here, but there's generally, you can look at it as no two of anything. There's no even two similar droplets of water in a swimming pool or even in the ocean. No two similar grains of sand. And especially there are no two similar individuals. Even two twins born at basically the same exact time, come from the same exact mom and dad, are, as you've noticed, quite different individuals, So there are no absolutes, and if any health professional is giving you an absolute answer, like that is such a huge red flag. Just instantly run away. They're either like totally manipulating you or just extremely incompetent, one or the other. No absolutes. Everything's different, and that's important to remember. So they never met you personally, okay? I forgot the second thing I was going to say, but I'll probably remember it later on in the live. So I'll begin here. Basically, we'll be talking about how various story gaps in a person's life lead to various maladaptive behavior that leads to various pathologies forming at the biological level. So it's important when you're starting a health journey, let's just kind of stick to fat loss because it's so common, okay? But this stuff could apply to depression. It could apply to high blood pressure, high triglycerides, low HDL, cholesterol issues in general, high resting blood glucose, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to start looking at excess weight as a symptom, right? Don't look at it as a standalone problem. Just look at it as a symptom. I have excess weight, so what is this telling me? You shouldn't really even be focused on the excess weight itself, although it's obviously manifesting itself at the biological level. You should be moreover asking, like, what is leading to this? And it's not genetics. Please, it's 2025. Let's put this kind of idiotic myth to rest and hopefully bury it further than 6 feet underground, okay? It's 2025, and you guys, just common sense. If you have an IQ higher than a person with severe brain damage, you'll realize that the human DNA hasn't changed in like 250,000 years. There's basically literally almost no obese people before 1950, okay? And because the DNA hasn't changed at all, and it's not going to change, human biology changes so excruciatingly slowly. I mean, it takes probably hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years, to make any kind of significant change where you can actually visually see it, etc., measure it, okay? So excess weight has nothing to do with your genetics, nothing. And you just have to accept that, because it kind of falls into this kind of victim mindset of like, then I can't do anything because it's my genetics. No, it's not your genetics. And in fact, there's no obese people before like 1950 or 1960 in America, for example. Okay. And even look at other examples like POWs. I bring this from an extremely respectful vantage point, but looking at prisoners of war. Like, look, they had gut issues, hormonal issues in these camps, beaten, quote unquote, starvation mode. Like, not a single person leaves those camps overweight or obese. Joey, what's going on? We're talking about story gaps today and how they lead to maladaptive behaviors that lead to excess weight and other health issues. If you have any questions, please let me know. But again, none of them left any of these camps overweight, et cetera, et cetera. So excess weight, obesity, being overweight, et cetera, not genetic at all, okay? Zero. It's actually just a symptom of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, obviously, that happen over very long periods of time. This isn't kind of like an overnight type of thing. Usually the average person gains about 5 pounds of excess weight a year, but let's say they start at 20, 10 years later, that's 50 pounds, 20 years later, that's like 100 pounds. So it kind of adds up, but slowly. And the problem why people kind of don't notice it in the moment is because it's so excruciatingly slow. The human central nervous system just kind of habituates to the new normal. So like, let's say you're 200 pounds and then later in the year, towards the end of the year, 205 pounds. Okay, That's such minimal weight gain, you barely notice that. And usually when people's clothing gets a little too tight, they simply just buy bigger clothing, and thus giving them the impression that they're the same weight, among various other things like their surroundings. Pretty much everyone around them is very overweight as well. And, 2025 Americans are mentally and physically the sickest humans in human history. Greg, what is going on? So obviously it's so common, people don't even see it as not normal, but it's total pathology 101. So you have to see it as a symptom. And I know the next thing people say, it's like, oh, like I've, kind of going back here, I'm looking at my notes. And one thing you want to be careful of is managing that symptom of excess weight with diet and exercise. Because I know that's the common solution. It's like, hey, you're overweight, just work out more and eat a little better, do this diet or whatever, eat a little bit less, etc., etc. But the problem with that model, in most cases, no absolutes, but literally in most cases, is the individual is using diet and exercise to manage the symptom of excess weight, and it doesn't work. If you can go to pubmed.gov and look up any studies that showed people that approach managing the symptom of excess weight with just diet and exercise alone, almost 95% relapse within 2 years, within 2 to 3 years. 95%. It's almost like not worth even doing from that vantage point for almost the bulk majority of people. And I would argue if you do like a 5 or 10 year follow-up, it's pretty much like 99.9% of people have relapsed at that point and regained all their weight. And this is due to various reasons. I'm not going to cover on this live here, but I've covered it on many other lives, such as you can look it up on my podcast, Eugene Trufkin Radio, Friends and Fat Gain, for example, because it makes it very tough for a person to sustain keeping their weight off when all their friends and family are or coworkers are very overweight, because those beliefs will saturate whatever you have, what kind of change you're trying to make. And obviously you'll return back to your normal ways, such as like when a person goes to a drug rehab center and then they kind of successfully complete it, let's say, but then returns back to the neighborhood with all their druggy friends. Obviously they're going to go back to using drugs. It's very, very, very high chance, like almost 100% likely, especially given the circumstance that at that point they probably don't even have a job and other problems going on, etc., that are going to contribute them slipping back into their old ways. So just know that it's too limiting to think like, hey, I have 30, 40, 50 pounds to lose, and literally all I have to do is just eat better and work out more. Obviously, on the surface, that is the answer, but it goes much deeper than that, especially when you start looking at self-sabotaging behavior or story gaps, etc., because inevitably there is a mind virus in this person, let's just say. It's like a belief system that makes it acceptable in their mind in one way or another to participate in certain behaviors over long periods of time that causes excess weight gain and other health issues. And this is a very long conversation, and what we're going to cover from one vantage point today, actually, but inevitably that needs to be addressed. And among various external environmental factors as well, such as, the normalization of pathology in American culture, with 9 out of 10 Americans currently being metabolically sick and 8.5 out of 10 being overweight, and also the most medically drugged out humans in all of human history. Obviously, when you have that all around you and you have even the genuine intention of wanting to create change, it's kind of hard to see successful examples of how to go about doing that, because pretty much, let's just say easily, 90% of people are living a life of extreme normalized pathology. It's not even minor. It's so extreme. It's so extreme. To be, 40 or 50 pounds overweight, there has to be so many variables going wrong in your internal and external environment to lead to that. And many people actually need to lose 60 or 70 pounds, not even 40 pounds anymore. In fact, I saw a study recently that showed 70% of Americans are not just overweight now, but obese. So to get to that level, there has to be an extreme amount of internal distress combined with an extreme amount of normalize pathology in the person's external environment as well. And obviously just telling them they need to just change their diet and work out a little bit more is beyond silly. It's kind of like telling a person that's an alcoholic that they just need to stop drinking more. So obviously they need to stop drinking more. But what are all the variables that are leading to that alcohol abuse, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to ask these deeper questions. And a lot of times when I do have this conversation with people, they say, well, I've tried everything. And it's not true. They've tried everything that they know, which isn't enough, because obviously they're still struggling with their issues. And oftentimes when I talk to people, I'm like, well, what have you tried? It usually indicates that they actually don't have even the most basic fundamental understanding of how to live life in a healthy, sustainable way, like even the most absolute basic. Like, for example, like when someone says, I've tried everything, I'm like, okay, well, what have you tried? Oh, I tried changing my diet. Well, what does that mean for you? Oh, like I tried keto, or I tried eating less, or something so like silly and amateur of that sort. So first of all, guys, the only nutrition program that's great is one that's specifically built out for you and your needs, and that's it. Okay? It all starts with obviously eating real food as a fundamental good advice, but everyone's metabolism, goals, etc., digestive health, metabolic health varies. And it also varies from which part of the journey they're in too. And a lot of times their goals change, So maybe sometimes a person will spend like 8 months losing weight, but then they lost all their weight. And now they want to build muscle. So the weight loss nutrition portion of their goal is not going to apply to their new goal. So it needs to change to their new goal. Or they want to do more endurance type things. So that needs to change. That's even different, etc., etc. So remember, anytime also someone says like, this diet works for everyone, dude, no absolutes, guys. That's a total amateur response. Oftentimes, those people become very popular online because it's a simple message to sell to the masses that don't want to think. Because they're already highly burned out in life and in a very myopic fight or flight state. They're already very burned out, extreme levels of adrenal fatigue, exhausted from work that they probably don't even like, have a lot of financial stress, etc., etc. And they're looking for just a quick, like 30-second soundbite that can solve all their problems. And it never works, guys. It never works. Don't fall for this stuff like trying to scroll around TikTok and just look for quick sound bites, because usually the ones that kind of stick out the most and get the most traction are kind of clickbait type of things, kind of they get people stirred up and commenting, and those comments and those likes, etc., boost the post so that more people see it, then eventually you end up seeing it. But it's beyond ludicrous, ridiculous, like what a lot of this advice is given out, and people listen to it on surface value. And the problem with that is two problems. First of all, there are no absolutes. Second of all, they never met you personally. How do they know what kind of advice to give you? It's silly. It's kind of like going to the doctor's office and they didn't even speak to you, and they're like, here, just take this medication. It's like, dude, you don't even know like what's going on with me. But people just accept these people's ideas because they kind of sound confident too. And that's kind of what kind of sells people a little bit easier. So when I hear them say they tried everything, it's totally false, especially for like metabolic health issues or weight issues. Those things are so easy to fix. If a person is struggling with those issues, it tells me that they may understand it at the intellectual level, but have no idea of how to apply it appropriately, or just literally have zero understanding about the utmost basic health principles, especially when they say something like, my high blood pressure or my weight issues are genetics because my mom has it or my dad has it. Both of them have it. Even my sisters have it. So that indicates that they're completely abysmally lost. So I would encourage them to, go to pubmed.gov, and that's where all the studies are that your doctors look at to give you advice. So you have access to them too. They're for free. Just go to there and find a single conclusive study for me that shows, your excess weight is like literally 100% tied to your genetics or your blood pressure or your triglycerides or your resting blood glucose or your testosterone, etc. You won't, guys. You will not, okay? That's so abysmally silly and such an amateur thing to say. And that's good because it kind of gives me an indication of where they're at and where we need to start, you know? So stuff of that sort. But yeah, I've tried everything, trust me, all the answers are out there. It's just most likely you're looking at the bad, wrong information or just don't know how to interpret the information. Or a lot of times too, you have to kind of be humble a little bit. I fall into this category as well in various aspects of life. But you can't solve a problem with the same belief system that led to the problem. It's like relying on the person that's stealing your money to look after your money. You know what I mean? It doesn't work. And I just challenge guys that are like 30 plus, 30, 40, 50, and still struggling with all these issues. It's like, come on, you had 3, 4, 5 decades to figure it out, but it's only probably gotten worse. So, you know, you try to be open-minded, or if not, like the saying goes, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So again, a quick recap. You got to see excess weight gain as a symptom. It's a symptom of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, but that's not enough too. Although those subjects are so important and I'm not discounting them, and I covered them on various other lives. You can check out probably start with like a very intro one is Eugene Trufkin Radio. I forgot the episode name, but the 4 doctors you'll ever need. It's another solo cast, and I talk about the 4 principles you just need to master to set a strong foundation to your health. And in fact, if you don't master these 4 things, no matter what you try to do on top of it, your results will like be abysmally poor. Or even if you do manage to somehow achieve anything, the fact is your foundation is so broken because you don't have these 4 principles mastered that anything if you try to build a good house on top of a poor foundation, that's silly, right? But that's exactly what people try to do that haven't even mastered basic health principles, which are those 4 things I talk about. And then they try all this other fancy stuff, buying a lot of supplements, which I personally don't recommend unless you've mastered these 4 things, because you're totally just wasting your money. So it's important to fat gain is a symptom. Aldo, what's going on? Alec, fat gain is a symptom of poor lifestyle and nutritional choices. And those poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, you got to ask the deeper question. It's like, why would a person abuse themselves? You know, why would they, let's say with poor lifestyle choices, not set healthy boundaries at work? Why would they go to sleep late all the time? Why would they get themselves in financial problems buying just non-essential things? You know what I mean? Et cetera, et cetera. And why would people eat poorly? Why would they show themselves that level of disrespect and that level of abuse? You know, going drinking and eating like fried food, or you know, having processed food be the bulk majority of your diet, et cetera, et cetera. And you guys, even if you eat out at these restaurants, not only are you paying a markup of like 300% or so, but you're also just basically getting factory farm food that happens to be very seasoned very well, you know, and that's it. And so you're getting, you know, those gargantuous amounts of insecticides, herbicides, pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, et cetera, on top of the genetically modified grain and soy that these animals were fed. And also, if you kind of go into a more spiritual direction, you know, if you eat the flesh of miserable animals and plants, you too become miserable. And with 9 out of 10 Americans right now metabolically sick and 8.5 out of 10 either overweight or obese, there might be something to it, you know, might be something to that saying. So because people don't become that metabolically sick and that obese without literally having a tremendous amount of internal distress combined with serious things going on in their external environment as well, like very, very serious, et cetera, okay? And again, I urge you guys, I know it's so common in our culture today to see this, but just because it's common, it doesn't make it normal, okay? So let's see, poor lifestyle. So again, what leads people to poor lifestyle and nutritional choices? Well, it's a belief system, obviously, that doesn't facilitate health conscious choices, right? Your central nervous system, your mind, and your spinal cord etc. And your mind produces thoughts. So it's producing thoughts that aren't conducive to sustainable, healthy living, right? And I refer to this as actually like a mind virus. It's some kind of belief system that infected this individual. And just like the virus, like COVID, for example, this virus actually ends up causing a tremendous amount of misery in the organism while they're alive. It eventually kills the organism, the living organism. Just like COVID, eventually killed certain people, etc., that had obviously were already very metabolically sick and very overweight. That's pretty much 99% of those that died from that virus, right? So inevitably, this mind virus causes this person to participate in certain behaviors and actions that lead to excess weight over a long period of time. So there are so many different examples of this mind virus, but one example that I see quite often is kind of like a super overweight guy, let's say 40 years old, 50 pounds overweight, huge, like big belly, has been living this way for forever. And instead of kind of using their mental resources, their mental and physical resources and financial resources to maybe take like a $500 course on holistic lifestyle practices or a nutrition course, which are about like online, like $500, you know what I mean? And this information you'll have for the rest of your life to benefit you. And, or they could just buy like a used book on Amazon for like $3, or hire a coach for like a good coach is probably like $3,000 to $5,000 for a 4 to 6 month program that would be life-changing if you find the right coach. But instead of spending money on that and devoting their resources to that, they're thinking of like, oh, what's going to be like my European trip, this year, or house renovation. I had a person that, this was a long time ago, had a stroke, and very overweight guy, a lot of health issues. And I suggested that he take a course at the Czech Institute. I think it was like $600. And it was a really cool course. It combined like nutrition, lifestyle, exercise science, etc., etc. It was like 4 days long. And he's like, oh, it's too expensive because I want to get this floor remodeled in my house. And I'm like, dude, come on. Like, you had a stroke and you're very overweight, you're very sick, and you're worried about remodeling your house. And that's totally understandable because sick people cannot make healthy decisions, or they wouldn't be sick to begin with, obviously, so it all makes sense. But in a way, this mind virus is causing them to believe that these actions are acceptable. And they really genuinely believe it. You know what I mean? Like, you tell them like, hey, an organic 2,000 calorie organic diet at the grocery store level, at least it's like, I don't know, 6,000 a year, 7,000 a year or something. And you tell them like, hey, you could just start with eating this diet, and they're like, oh, it's way too expensive. And then you tell them, well, how about this European trip you booked for like 3,000 to 4,000 for like literally 2 weeks? You know what I mean? And it's done nothing for you in the grand scheme of things. You're still very overweight. You're still miserable. Still look very haggard and old. And after those 2 weeks, you're back to the environment that led to all that anyways. And literally nothing has changed, you know what I mean? But they're okay with spending money on that stuff, but completely repulsed when you tell them to spend an equivalent amount of money on their actual mental and physical health, which is, regardless of your goal in life, literally like the most important thing. Because once you lose either of those, the quality of your life plummets so abysmally quickly. You will quickly get humbled. And even if it's not dire, you're in a state of normalized misery because there's no way you could be happy having to take all these medical drugs or, having a huge belly sticking out in front of your belt line, etc., etc., and seeing that every single day in the mirror. There's no way. You could play an elusive game of reframing the negative into the positive, but that's just basically kind of like quicksand. And is a form of dissociation, I found, with pretty much everyone, and keeps people stuck in those cycles of pathology. So you go like, okay, so there's a belief system, there's kind of a mind virus that leads to poor lifestyle and nutritional choices, that leads to excess weight over time and other health issues. Okay, cool. So what is this belief system composed of? This is a long conversation, and I'm just going to be covering one aspect of that trend, okay? So one of the issues that if you dig deeper into these belief systems is usually, and this is a person that's already kind of done a little bit of inner work, is usually, and most people haven't, they're just in the problem unaware stage still. They think it's like they're 50 pounds overweight and they're on blood pressure meds and cholesterol meds because of their genetics still. They're that kind of completely abysmally lost. So for the people that aren't in that category, that done a little bit of inner work, you find in their belief system, there's usually some type of story gap present in the person's life. And the story gap theme can take on many different directions. So one common one is kind of like, let's say a person genuinely deep down inside wants to be like an artist, right? But because of either self-esteem issues or no reinforcement from the external environment, such as their parents, et cetera, and just other variables, they don't feel safe expressing their genuine self, that they're an artist. Their biology doesn't feel safe. They don't feel safe in the external world that they're going to be accepted for that, in the sense that maybe no one's going to buy their art, or they think their art is not that good, et cetera, and then they'll end up homeless and in danger, obviously. And that could be a real scenario too. But regardless, they just don't feel safe expressing who they are. So they kind of take a more traditional path that's already been kind of paved by many people in front of them. So let's say they become a lawyer or a MBA or a factory manager or something of that sort. So this will probably totally be fine if the work was like 10 to 20 hours a week, because you can kind of balance everything out then. But the problem is most jobs are like 40, 50, 60 hours. And then it's not like the quantity of time either. It's just you don't have much energy left over, especially if you're not working remote. You have to commute to work, be there all day, then commute back, probably sit in traffic a little bit. You just get home quite tired, et cetera, et cetera. So inevitably, they don't feel safe expressing themselves that they want to be an artist, so they kind of pick this other path for their biological safety. And for the first few years, it's probably fine. You don't have any issues. You make like good money, predictable money. With the lawyer path, you have that law degree. So it kind of provides some social prestige for people that are into that, which increases your chance of attracting more partners, possibly getting into more kind of wealthier and educated circles, et cetera, and that's great if that's a person's core values. But in this case, the person generally wants to be an artist, and what happens after a few years is basically they sense that story gap. They sense they're sitting there and they're doing all this paperwork, and it's probably like very stressful as a lawyer too, especially if you're going to court. And they're like, man, I just want to be on the beach, like painting something, you know what I mean? And then let's say one of your partners at the law firm kind of falls behind on their work, and you have to take on their casework, and you kind of grow disgruntled towards the partner. And then there's kind of this bitterness at work then, et cetera, et cetera. This can take on many different forms. But either way, it creates this kind of insidious stress response. It's kind of low grade, but sometimes also could be a combination of macro and micro stressors as well. Macro stress is kind of like a very serious case with a lot on the line, but then micro stress is also kind of thinking about like, hey, I don't even want to be here. I just want to be on the beach, like painting scenery and stuff of that sort. So what happens in this case is, since the person doesn't feel safe expressing themselves in the external environment, what they do is seek out food, right? Or in some extreme cases, drugs, promiscuous sex. Sometimes people take on activities that are socially acceptable, such as becoming a workaholic too, but they're all forms of dissociation and don't help the person long term, although they might provide some short-term relief. So regarding the food topic, is they seek out food because food is unconditional love. You could, first of all, the person has control, right? They can purchase the food when they want, and it's very accessible pretty much anywhere you go in America. They could eat it, and put it down whenever they want. And they feel they don't have that control in the external world because they feel they need to work for money, for example, basically, to feel safe, etc., etc. So another thing is this food provides unconditional love. It doesn't ask any questions, it just gives you pleasure whenever you want it, so the power, and it accepts you for who you are. It doesn't ask any questions. But the real world, the external world, doesn't accept you for who you are, and it never will, because although there are conveniences to industrial society, in a way you need to plug into that society and into its systems. There's a lot. What's the book name? I have it here somewhere. I think Industrial Society and Its Future. It's been quite a while since I read it. I know I have it here somewhere. But basically, like these days, you just have to plug into industry. Even our health fields are all about not fixing the environment that causes depression. Don't worry about quitting your job or the story gap that you don't like your job and it's causing you to be depressed and overworked, etc., etc. But let's kind of teach you how to reframe, kind of manipulate your conditioned self and reframe the negative into the positive, and think about it, change your story a little bit differently so that you can plug into, you can work more hours, you can stay plugged into that sick society, etc., etc. So that's kind of how healthcare works in the US. It's not about changing the environment, internal and external, that's leading to all those. No, let's keep all that the same. Let's just get you to kind of think a little bit differently about it, you know what I mean? Or something silly. Or let's, get you on these 5 antidepressants so you're so numbed out, you don't even know where you are half the time, etc., etc. So, but in a sense, this story gap leads to this disconnect. And then people try to kind of fill that gap, but the problem is they're not meeting the problem at the level of the problem. So sure, the people eat the food and it makes them feel good in the moment, but then, an hour later, you realize that, hey, I'm still working a job I hate. You know what I mean? And you do it again, and then 10 years later, you find that you're 50 pounds overweight and have various health issues and are depressed and are on 5 different medical drugs and a few antidepressants, but still somehow depressed. You know what I mean? I've never seen a person personally in 20 years of being a professional healthcare provider become healthy, just medically drugging themselves. I've never seen it happen. In fact, I've never seen healthy, happy people need medical drugs, so why don't we just focus on making people healthy and happy? That's what I would say. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on in this live, kind of how a story gap leads to excess weight over time and other health issues. And it's critically important, guys, to meet the problem at its level when dealing with chronic health issues, especially with metabolic health issues or even mental health issues. Because if you don't meet the problem at its level, and it's kind of like a saying I got from one of my favorite authors, Stefan Walensky, the problem persists, It's like, I don't care how well you painted this house over here, the house you needed to work on is over here. You know what I mean? So you have to meet the problem at its correct level. And if your weight challenges are due to a story gap, obviously you need to go deeper than that as well. That's where it needs to be met. You know what I mean? If you want a true resolution, instead of just kind of running in circles and making yourself believe you're trying to really create change in your life when really you're not. You're just trying to kind of like cut corners a little bit here and then somehow trick yourself into convincing yourself that you're creating change where in fact you're really actually not. So that's it, guys. So for example, if like the individual is struggling with a story gap in their life and they go to a CrossFit class or something like that, like how's that meeting the problem at its correct level? They could do the CrossFit class while attending to the story gap and kind of closing that gap, because the wider the story gap, the more of a stress response in the central nervous system you're going to have. And thus the more maladaptive behavior you're going to form. And that's it. Because you have to form that maladaptive behavior, because in the extreme cases, you're only the organism's only other option is basically just to kill itself. So these maladaptive behaviors are basically a defense against suicide, to buy you more time, et cetera, et cetera. But in the meantime, they do create kind of sugar highs at best, but don't resolve any of the issues, and in fact probably just keep a person kind of buried in these issues, and it gets kind of like quicksand. You get deeper and deeper year after year, et cetera, et cetera. And then you kind of run into these situations like, oh, now I've been doing this for like forever, and now it'll be too tough to change. And then people begin to nest, and then instead of changing, they kind of start using positive psychology as a form of dissociation, and kind of this tricky game of reframing the negative into the positive when they know they're kind of bullshitting and gaslighting themselves, but they still continue to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So long conversation, kind of see it all the time. But this is how you honestly approach a fat loss journey or any kind of health journey. This is it. Is it easy? It's not easy, but it's the only way if you want lasting change and not to be all like medically drugged out by the time you hit 40 or 50. That's it. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope you guys have a good weekend. I kind of wanted to touch on one more thing, but kind of spaced out a little bit on it. But either way, very informative live. I'll just kind of say it for myself, and I hope you guys found it informative too. And that way you guys don't waste your time and money on not meeting the problem at its correct level, but really get to the honest reasons of why things are happening, and go from there. And the first step is always to become problem aware. Like, where is your problem? What's the root cause of your problem? And then kind of go from there, okay? All right, guys. Hope this is helpful. Take care.